Some movies don't just make headlines, they cause governments to sweat. Europe has a history of producing films that left audiences rattled, theaters raided, and reels locked away for decades. What kind of movie makes officials panic and viewers whisper about secret screenings? What could be so powerful that even the rumor of watching it felt dangerous? Get ready, because these aren't just banned films. They're cinematic landmines that redefine the very meaning of too far. Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Some films are described as disturbing. This one laughed in the face of the word. Directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini, Salo wasn't just another art film. It became a cinematic lightning rod that almost nobody could sit through without looking away. Pasolini adapted an infamous novel into a grim story set in fascist Italy, where a group of powerful figures take young people into a remote mansion and strip away their humanity one chilling step at a time. What shocked audiences most wasn't just the cruelty on display, but the way Pasolini filmed it. There was no softening, no heroic character to cheer for, no soundtrack to cushion the blow. It was stark, cold, and relentless. When the movie premiered, police were called, reels were cut, and protests broke out. Italy hacked away entire sections, but still couldn't bring themselves to release it in full. France and the UK banned it outright, and Australia declared it unfit for viewing. For decades, Salo was spoken of like a virus, something dangerous that might leave a permanent scar if you dared to watch it. Yet critics split down the middle. Some called it pure depravity. Others hailed it as vital art that forced society to confront its darkest corners. Today, it sits high on lists of the most difficult films ever made. Whether you consider it a masterpiece or a step too far, Salo remains one of the most infamous examples of how far European cinema was willing to go. A Clockwork, Orange 1971. It wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural earthquake. Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, based on Anthony Burgess's novel, turned futuristic London into a nightmare playground of youth gone wild. With its wild costumes, strange slang, and classical music blasting over shocking imagery, the film felt unlike anything audiences had seen before. But it didn't just challenge film style, it sparked real-world chaos. In the UK, newspapers screamed that the movie was inspiring young people to copy what they saw on screen. Politicians demanded it be banned. Even worse, Kubrick and his family started receiving threats, with the director himself eventually asking the studio to pull the film from British theaters. And so, for nearly 30 years, A Clockwork Orange was off limits in its own country. For an entire generation, the film became a whispered legend, a forbidden fruit that you could only hear about or find through grainy bootleg copies. Across Europe, the bans piled up. Ireland said no, Sweden sliced away entire scenes, and Italy braced for outrage. Ironically, the controversy only made the film's reputation grow. By the time the UK lifted the ban in 2000, younger audiences found it less shocking, but still undeniably powerful. What makes A Clockwork Orange unforgettable isn't just the controversy, but the way it changed how people talked about film. It forced a debate about the impact of cinema itself, about whether movies could influence behavior. Love it or hate it, Kubrick's vision left scars on the culture that no censor's scissors could erase. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. This wasn't just a horror movie, it was a courtroom case. Ruggero Deodato's Cannibal Holocaust shocked Europe so badly that Italian authorities arrested the director for suspicion of actual murder. Why? Because his fake documentary looked too real. The story follows an American film crew disappearing in the Amazon, only for shocking footage of their journey to be discovered later. The shaky camera work, the unpolished style, and the raw detail made audiences believe they were watching reality unfold. When it premiered in Milan, chaos followed. Deodato had to drag his actors into court just to prove they were still alive. Once the charges were cleared, the controversy only grew. Across Europe, bans stacked up. The UK placed it on its notorious Video Nasties list, making it one of the most targeted films of the decade. Norway and Germany banned it. Australia refused to release it. Even today, some countries still won't allow uncensored versions. What made it so infamous wasn't only its raw visuals, but the questions it raised. Was this art or exploitation? Critics called it a new low for cinema, while horror fans traded VHS copies like contraband, daring each other to finish the film without turning away. Decades later, Cannibal Holocaust remains one of the most controversial European releases of all time. For some, it's a classic of extreme horror. For others, it's proof that filmmakers can sometimes push the line so far it disappears altogether. Either way, it's impossible to talk about banned films without mentioning this jungle nightmare. The Devil's 1971. If there was ever a film designed to cause panic, Ken Russell's The Devils was it. Based on real events from 17th century France, it told the story of a priest caught in a whirlwind of accusations, mass hysteria, and corruption. But Russell didn't deliver a safe history lesson. Instead, he turned it into a fever dream of chaos, shocking visuals, and unforgettable performances. The British Board of Film Classification demanded massive cuts before it could even hit theaters, and entire scenes were buried for decades. Even in its trimmed-down version, the reaction was explosive. Politicians called it dangerous. The Vatican condemned it. Protests erupted in multiple cities, and in countries like France and Italy, entire regions banned the film outright. Finland and Norway kept it off screens altogether. What rattled people so much wasn't just the story, but how Russell told it. His direction bounced between gothic horror and surreal visions, with no safe ground for the audience to stand on. It was messy, fearless, and utterly unafraid of tearing apart tradition and authority. To this day, the full uncut version has never had a wide release, which only fuels its legend. The Devils has become the ultimate forbidden British film, a reminder of how far art can go in challenging power. Whether you see it as visionary or outrageous, one thing is certain. It burned its way into cinema history. Irreversible 2002. Gaspar Noé's Irreversible isn't a movie you casually watch, it's a challenge you survive. Premiering at Cannes, it had viewers fleeing the theater within minutes, unable to handle what they were seeing. Shot in reverse order, the story unfolds backward, beginning with chaos and violence, then slowly revealing the tragic events that led there. This structure forces you to live with consequences before you even know the cause. What truly shocked audiences wasn't just the filmmaking technique, but the relentless brutality on display. The dizzying camera work, the booming low-frequency soundtrack, and the raw performances by Monica Bellucci and Vincent Cassel left even hardened critics shaken. In Italy and Norway, the film was either banned or cut to pieces. Even in France, the home of bold cinema, debates raged in newspapers about whether the film was a masterpiece or a disgrace. Noé didn't seem to care about the outrage. He openly said he wanted to make a movie you couldn't watch and forget. Mission accomplished. Even after the bans eased, Irreversible kept its reputation as one of the most punishing films Europe has ever produced. More than 2 decades later, it's still remembered as a dare. If you sit through Irreversible, you don't just watch a movie. You walk away with an imprint you'll never fully shake off. It's proof that sometimes the most haunting films aren't the ones with ghosts, but the ones that stare too deeply into human cruelty. Base Moi, 2000. This wasn't just a French road movie, it was a cinematic firestorm. Directed by Virginie Despentes and Coralie Trinthi, Base Moi barreled onto the scene with a story about 2 women who go on a chaotic rampage after facing brutal injustice. But it wasn't the plot that caused European governments to panic. It was the way the film refused to play by the rules. When it premiered, French authorities slapped it with a rare X rating, the kind usually reserved for material never meant to cross into mainstream theaters. That decision sparked outrage from artists and critics who argued the film was being unfairly punished simply for refusing to soften its impact. But the storm didn't stop in France. Norway outright banned it. Australia followed suit. Even in its home country, screenings were met with protests, court challenges, and attempts to shut it down. What made Base Moi so different was its refusal to flinch. Its raw camera work, jittery editing, and relentless pace gave the story an edge that audiences couldn't ignore. Some saw it as a feminist statement, others as pure chaos designed to shock. Either way, it was impossible to dismiss. 2 decades later, Base Moi is still one of the most infamous French films of modern times. It carved out a reputation as a cinematic dare, too raw for some, groundbreaking for others. Whether you call it art or provocation, the movie forced Europe to wrestle with one question: should films comfort us, or challenge us until we can't look away. Nymphomaniac 2013. When Lars von Trier announced he was making a 5-hour epic about human obsession, critics assumed he was exaggerating. But when Nymphomaniac finally premiered, it landed like a thunderclap across Europe. Told in 2 volumes, the film followed a woman recounting her life through a series of intense experiences. On paper, it sounded like an art house drama. On screen, it became one of the most hotly debated films of the decade. Several countries immediately placed heavy restrictions on screenings. Norway and Turkey blocked it completely. France and Germany demanded trimmed versions, cutting entire sequences before audiences could see them. Even in Denmark, von Trier's home country, debates raged over whether the film was art or provocation. The split was sharp. Some festivals celebrated it as a bold piece of storytelling, while mainstream theaters wanted nothing to do with it. What set Nymphomaniac apart wasn't just its subject, but its scale. Von Trier didn't hold back. He used long, detailed storytelling, graphic symbolism, and dreamlike imagery to push his audience to the breaking point. For some, it was fearless art. For others, it was a challenge no one asked for. Over a decade later, the controversy has cooled, but the film's reputation hasn't. It's still seen as one of the most daring European releases of the 2010 seconds, proof that von Trier knew exactly how to push every button. Whether you think it's groundbreaking or exhausting, Nymphomaniac remains a classic example of a film that governments tried to block, but audiences still found a way to see. In the realm of the senses, 1976. Few films caused as much chaos at customs checkpoints as In the Realm of the Senses. Directed by Nagisa Oshima, but funded and released in France, it blurred the line between Japanese cinema and European distribution in the boldest way possible. Based on a true story of obsession in 1930 Seconds Tokyo, the film didn't just push boundaries, it ran straight through them. When it premiered in France, the reaction was instant. Police raided theaters, reels disappeared, and governments scrambled to stop it from spreading. Authorities in Germany and the UK banned it outright, while customs agents went so far as to seize film prints at airports. Even Italy and Spain declared it off-limits, calling it a danger to public order. Critics, meanwhile, argued it was more than shock value. With its hypnotic cinematography and unflinching approach, they said Oshima had created a work of art that examined human obsession like nothing else before. Audiences didn't know what to make of it. Some hailed it as a masterpiece. Others fled the theater in discomfort. Despite decades of bans and seizures, In the Realm of the Senses survived through underground screenings and cinephile devotion. Today, it stands as a symbol of just how far people will go to defend freedom of expression. Love it or hate it, the film proved that cinema could be so powerful. Governments felt threatened just by its existence. Matador, 1986. Before Pedro Almodóvar became Spain's most celebrated filmmaker, he made Matador, a movie so intense that it sent Spanish censors into overdrive. Set in the world of bullfighting, obsession, and desire, the film was anything but a safe drama. It was a fever dream that exposed the darkest corners of human nature, and European audiences weren't ready. In Spain, authorities demanded cuts to several scenes. In Ireland, the film was banned altogether. Other countries quietly restricted it, limiting screenings to adults-only showings or forcing edits that stripped out key moments. Critics either hailed it as a bold statement or dismissed it as a provocation. What made Matador stand out was Almodóvar's direction. He wasn't trying to tell a straightforward story. Instead, he created something hallucinatory, blending intense imagery with surreal energy that left viewers unsettled. For some, it was art. For others, it was too much. The controversy didn't hurt Almodóvar. It helped launch his reputation as a fearless filmmaker, willing to push past every boundary. Matador showed that Spain's most daring director wasn't going to play safe, and the bans only amplified his reputation. Today, it's remembered as a turning point in European cinema, the kind of film that proved art could be dangerous, unforgettable, and absolutely impossible to ignore. A Serbian film, 2010. Few movies in recent memory caused the kind of worldwide uproar that a Serbian film did. Released in 2010, this Serbian production arrived with an unshakable reputation, shocking, unrelenting, and so extreme that governments scrambled to keep it off screens. What made it so explosive was its mix of political allegory and disturbing imagery, delivered with such intensity that it blurred the line between art and provocation. When it premiered, entire countries acted immediately. Spain banned it. Norway and Brazil followed. In the UK, only a heavily cut version was ever allowed, and even then, it came with one of the most severe age restrictions possible. Germany and Australia restricted it as well, ensuring the unedited version was nearly impossible to see legally across Europe. The controversy wasn't just about what was shown, but about the feeling it left behind. Audiences walked out stunned, disturbed, and furious. The filmmakers argued it was an allegory about corruption, power, and exploitation in their home country. Critics, however, were divided. Some praised its bold symbolism, others dismissed it as pure excess that should never have been filmed. Despite, or perhaps because of, the bans, a Serbian film spread underground. Pirated copies appeared online, passed around by viewers curious to see what had been forbidden. More than a decade later, it remains one of the most heavily censored European films of all time. Whether you see it as political art or provocation for its own sake, one thing is certain: few films have sparked more debate over where cinema's limits should be drawn. Love Camp 71969. Sometimes, a movie is so controversial that it isn't just banned, it's practically erased from public life. Love Camp 7, a British-Italian production released in 1969, took audiences into a World War II setting, but quickly veered off into territory that European censors found intolerable. What looked like another war rescue story turned into something darker, and authorities wasted no time pulling the plug. The British Board of Film Classification flat out refused to approve it. Ireland quickly banned it. Norway followed. Decades later, it remained one of the few films still completely banned in the UK, making it one of the longest-standing prohibited titles in British film history. Collectors swapped bootleg copies in secret, but for most people, the movie existed more as a rumor than as something they had actually seen. Critics dismissed it as trash cinema, but historians took a different view. They pointed to Love Camp 7 as one of the earliest examples of European exploitation films, pushing so hard against the boundaries that it forced governments to rethink censorship entirely. The bans weren't just about this one movie, they were about what might come next. Today, Love Camp 7 is still more talked about than actually watched. Its reputation lives on as a cautionary tale of just how far European authorities would go to stop a film they saw as dangerous. Whether it was truly worth banning or not, the fact that it's still illegal in places says it all. Pink Flamingos 1972. If you think Europe couldn't be shocked, think again. John Waters' cult classic Pink Flamingos was technically American, but it hit Europe like a cultural grenade. With its outrageous characters and gleeful embrace of bad taste, the movie didn't just cross lines, it shredded them. European censors didn't hesitate. The UK refused classification altogether, making it illegal to show or even own for years. Switzerland and Norway banned it. Australia slammed the door shut. What panicked governments wasn't just the wild storyline. It was the sense that this wasn't simply a movie, it was an act of rebellion. To them, Waters wasn't just poking fun, he was throwing a Molotov cocktail at polite society, and the more authorities tried to suppress it, the more legendary it became. Fans smuggled VHS tapes across borders, hosting underground screenings that felt more like protests than movie nights. Waters himself leaned into the chaos, proudly calling the film an act of cinematic mischief. Decades later, critics recognized it as a milestone in cult cinema. The irony is that the bans only made Pink Flamingos bigger. Instead of disappearing, it became a badge of honor for anyone daring enough to watch it. Even today, it remains a case study in how censorship can turn a film into legend. Sometimes, the most shocking thing isn't what happens on screen, it's the freedom the film demands. Battle Royale, 2000. Every once in a while, a film is so far ahead of its time that governments panic before audiences even catch up. Battle Royale, a Japanese production directed by Kinji Fukasaku, was one of those films. Its arrival in Europe at the turn of the millennium felt like a shockwave. The story? A group of students forced into a deadly survival game on an island where only one could walk away. The timing was brutal. Real-world violence in schools had European governments on edge, and Battle Royale was immediately labeled dangerous. Germany and the UK hesitated to allow it, slapping restrictions on screenings. France kept it away from younger audiences. Across Europe, the fear was that the movie was too raw, too realistic, and too close to the anxieties of the time. The bans only made it more popular among younger viewers. Bootleg DVDs were traded like secret treasure, and the film's lines and imagery seeped into underground culture. Directors and critics called it a sharp warning about society's obsession with competition and spectacle. Authorities, meanwhile, called it a public menace. Over the years, Battle Royale has been re-evaluated. What once terrified governments is now recognized as one of the most influential films of its generation, inspiring countless imitators and even big-budget franchises. What started as a banned import ended up shaping an entire era of cinema. Sometimes, the movie they try to hide turns out to be the one that changes everything. The House That Jack Built, 2018. Lars von Trier makes this list twice, and for good reason. With The House That Jack Built, he once again proved he was Europe's master of provocation. Premiering at Cannes, the film had hundreds of people walking out midway, unable to handle its chilling depiction of an obsessive man who views his crimes as art. Even before the credits rolled, it was clear von Trier had lit another firestorm. In Europe, bans and restrictions hit quickly. Some countries refused to screen the uncensored version, while others placed age ratings so high they practically barred audiences from seeing it. Critics were divided straight down the middle. Some hailed it as a dark masterpiece, others called it unwatchable provocation. The controversy was so intense that, for weeks after Cannes, the movie was the only thing people were talking about on the European film circuit. What makes The House That Jack Built so unsettling is von Trier's deliberate approach. Instead of hiding behind stylized horror, he presented events in a cold, clinical way that dared audiences to stick it out. Many didn't. But here's the twist. The bans only amplified its reputation. By the time it reached home release, it had already cemented itself as a modern cult classic. Like so many other films on this list, The House That Jack Built proved that when European cinema chooses to shock, it doesn't just push boundaries, it dares to erase them. Europe has always treated cinema like a battlefield. These 14 films weren't just banned, they were treated like ticking bombs, capable of shaking society at its core. Some faded into legend, others came back stronger, but all of them proved the same point. When movies cross the line, people notice. So, which of these banned films would you dare to sit through? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more untold stories from film history. The reel may end, but the debate never does.